This is Radio Free Mormon. Good evening. Bill Reel and I have previously observed an apparent redefining of the Great Apostasy in the LDS Church, where it appears the church is making it into a kinder, gentler kind of Great Apostasy. You know, the kind that doesn't alienate the rest of the Christian world. And one specific quote from John Taylor, third president of the church, is used by these Mormon scholars to try to show that the Dark Ages weren't so dark after all. But is this really what the quote means? And perhaps more troubling, why would Mormon scholars knowingly misuse a quote to advance a redefinition of basic Mormon doctrine? Charles Harrell, former BYU professor and author of This Is My Doctrine, joins us to share his recent and startling findings tonight on Mormonism Live. Well, hello, everybody. I think I'm bipolar there for a second. Well, I just flew in from Utah, and boy, are my arms tired.
That was your split personality, I thought, up on the screen.
Absolutely.
You said you're back from Utah and your arms are tired.
Yes. I flew back. It's a joke.
Okay. Well,
that is a really bad joke, but when I tell it, I make it fresh again.
Well, good to see you, Mr. Radio Free Mormon. How has your time been since you got back?
It has been, since I got back, it's been busy as usual. But yes, while I was gone to Las Vegas, courtesy of and with my very dear friend, Randall Bell. All of a sudden I blank on his name, right? My dear friend, Randy Bell. I don't know if I should say Dr. Randy Bell. Put me up and took me out and treated me and feted me. And we had a great time looking at a bunch of magic shows. There's a lot of magic shows in Vegas.
I've
never been to Vegas before. Well, I guess once, and there was one show. Okay, I have, but not like this. All right. So the whole thing is that we're studying these shows and trying to see elements in them because there are different kinds of ways that magicians present their magic in these shows. You can go from David Copperfield to Penn and Teller to this other guy at the very end. It's terrible that I don't know him. His name was Chris, right? Criss, super famous magician. What's his name? Do you know, Bill?
Yes.
Chris?
Yeah, but I don't. I'd have to look it up. But
Wait, is this Earth A?
Chris Vegas magician.
Because it's Criss, and he has an A. Angel, Chris. And we saw him. He's very edgy. So we're looking at all these things, and we're putting them together, and we're coming to different realizations and insights, which we're going to assemble, polish up, and hopefully present before too long.
Yeah, I think
Chris Angel. Now, this is amazing too, because he said that he really hit the big time in the year 2000 when he was presenting on a stage, and I thought, yeah, that was definitely a couple years after I'd entered into my chained in the basement phase of my second marriage. So there was a lot of things that were going on in the outside world that completely passed me by, like anything during that time period. So Chris Angel was one of them, but he was fantastic. It was just amazing that Randy's going, "You've never heard of this guy?" And he's showing this reel before his show, or as part of his show, where he's been on all these different shows and all these different specials, and he's become a cultural reference. Like they have Simpsons and other, people talking about him, and it goes on and on and on. He is such an icon. And I just never heard of him, but Chris Angel, he was fantastic.
He was the most impressive of all the magicians you saw.
There are pluses there to all of them, and there are other things that maybe not as much. I wouldn't want to say that. Do you mean I don't know how they did it? Is that what you mean, or
I mean, the most awe and wonder watching the magic tricks themselves, not the jokes or the
So you want
commentary,
awe and wonder.
just the magic. Yeah. Which magician did the best, most awe and wonder in their
Oh,
magic trick?
probably David Copperfield,
Mm.
when he made a freaking UFO appear in the middle of the theater. This is an indoor theater, and the most amazing thing is that Carrie Schertz was riding it on top.
Good old Carrie Shirts. Yeah,
And
don't
he
let there
was
be a
saying something
UFO without
about,
Carrie catching it.
remember me? Hello, boys.
Yeah, that's super cool. Well, I'm glad you had a
Okay,
great time.
I'm back.
Yeah.
It was a great time. It was a great time. Thank you very much. And what were you doing? You were down there. I saw you at one point, I think.
Yeah, we hung out in sunny southern Utah. It was a little hot that evening. I'll just tell
Boy.
folks we rented a clubhouse and the AC was set to turn off at a certain time. And because we rented it, they should have rescheduled it so it stayed on in the evening. It did not. It was set to heat and 76 degrees, which means anything under 76, it would heat it to 76, but it wasn't going to turn the AC on for nothing. It got up to about 78, 79. And we were lucky. One of the people in our audience was able to break open the box for the AC module, and we got her cooled down and enjoyed most of the evening
Oh man,
in AC room.
that was Turkish sauna territory.
It was bad. It was Turkish.
And I was thinking, Bill, why didn't you rent out the pool out here in the back?
You suggested that we take out the back and go hop in the pool, and that was probably going to be a viable option, even though nobody brought their swimsuit. That would have been a viable option, I think, another 20 or 30 minutes in that heat.
Yeah. At some point, you don't care anymore.
Yeah. Somebody asked, before you get to our guest, let me see if I can find it here. Starred, did you see Thunderbolts yet?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
I saw it last night.
Awesome. Was it good?
It was really, really good.
Good. Glad to hear it. There you go, folks.
And
There's
I think in the best of the Marvel tradition.
Yeah. Forget Rotten Tomatoes. That's the only review you need. Go see Thunderbolts.
It was fantastic. Everybody does great. And there's an asterisk at the end of Thunderbolts. And at the end of the movie, you get to find out what the asterisk stands for. But I won't spoil it for you.
All right. Can't wait to see it.
All right. So are we going to go on with our show, Old Bean?
Let's do it.
All right. Let's bring on Charles Harrell, professor of ancient scripture from BYU.
No,
Not ancient scripture, but you were a professor at BYU.
I was.
It had something to do with science?
Yes, in the School of Engineering and Technology.
Yes.
You
are well and truly retired. Oh, I'm so sorry. What, Bill?
You logic user, you rational thinker in the science department.
Yes.
All right.
I think we have a lazy learner in our midst.
Yeah, no, we don't want one of those.
Yes.
Well, Charles here has recently published in Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought, a paper that he's put together dealing with the very issue that I talked about in the opening about this quote from John Taylor and how it's being used and possibly misused by a long and growing line of Mormon scholars. So let's go ahead and let's see if we can bring this up. There we go. This show has a lot of titles. One title is John Taylor and the Truth About the Dark Ages, Rethinking the Great Apostasy. Another title was Were the Dark Ages So Dark After All? And my favorite was No, Terrell, That's Not History. Yes, Terrell Givens will figure prominently as the narrative proceeds. Hey, Bill?
Yes.
Let me see here. I can move this down here.
You're going to want this one. So let's get that off. And let's
we have two down there.
There you are.
They're exactly the same, but one I can move and one I can't. So here's Charles Harrell. Hey, Bill, could you tell our audience what Charlie has won?
Yeah. So Charles Harrell is a retired associate professor of manufacturing engineering at Brigham Young University, where he specialized in manufacturing systems design and simulation. He's also the founder and former director of Pro Model Corporation, a leading provider of simulation technology. In addition to his professional activities and publications, he is a longtime doctrinal enthusiast and has written numerous articles and papers on various doctrinal topics. He's the author of a well-known book in these circles, This Is My Doctrine, The Development of Mormon Theology, by Koford Books in 2011. He and his wife, Yvonne, have 5 children, 17 grandchildren, and they split their time between Orem and Washington, Utah. Why haven't we gone out to dinner yet, Charley Harrell?
We got to do that next time we're
You're in
down.
Washington, Utah. I'm right there by the Black Bear Diner. It would be so easy to catch a bite with you, Charley. And
Oh, yeah, that's very
ask
close.
you some questions. So I'd love it.
Yeah.
Well, good. I'm glad I brought you two together.
That's nice.
And here's the cover of that book. Very influential, important, watershed kind of book in Mormon studies. This Is My Doctrine, The Development of Mormon Theology by Charles R. Harrell. He's going to take the tools that he showed in this book and use them on this particular issue, where he figures out where certain doctrines began and who used them and passed them on and what ended up happening to them.
Can I just say one thing, which is whenever somebody says, Bill, what are the top 5 books I just need to read to understand the messiness of Mormonism? Your book, Mr. Harrell, This Is My Doctrine, is always on that short list.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because I look up here and now I'm at the top of the totem pole over here on the side. I had just put myself at the bottom, and
because I'll say the least tonight. It seems important that the comments put up on the screen block my face and not the two of you.
if all of us are going to try and be the humblest and the lowest, then it's not going to work out.
Yeah, but mine's also a rational answer.
Okay. Well, this is a very rational paper written in a rational journal called Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought. Just spring of 2025. This is hot off the press. It is an article called John Taylor on the Dark Ages by, drumroll please, Charles Harrell. And there it is. Now, that's the cover, right?
Gorgeous cover. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of looks like my kid drew it in crayon. I mean, am I allowed to say that? I'm sure it's very nice. It's a talented child who drew that.
Oh.
I'm so going to hell. Rex Reed has nothing on me. So this is the article, and we're going to be going over what's in the article tonight. So why don't you take it away, Professor Harrell?
Thank you. So yes, in this article, I look at this quote by John Taylor that has been used an awful lot in the last couple decades after nobody has taken any notice of it for 130 years since it was first delivered. And it has to do with the apostasy. So as we look at the apostasy, and of course, going back to the slide, we all know what the traditional narrative, LDS narrative of the Great Apostasy is in the church. Here's a verse from D&C 1:12-23. Verily, verily, I say unto you, darkness covereth the earth, and gross darkness the minds of the people. All flesh has become corrupt before my face. So it doesn't leave any window open for even a glimmer of light almost in this statement. It paints the bleakest picture of the period of the apostasy. So Joseph Smith, in fact, when he went into the Grove of Trees to pray, he was answered by Jesus at least in the 1838 account.
That's the best one.
That he should join none of the churches because they were all wrong. And the personage who addressed me said that all their creeds were an abomination in his sight, that those professors were all corrupt, that they draw near unto me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They teach for doctrines the commandments of men having a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof. So basically, the Savior's throwing all of the churches under the bus that were around then.
And I don't know how long I'd been a member of the church. It was a long time before I found out that when it says professors, it's not talking about college professors. It's just talking about people who believe it. They profess it.
Good distinction.
Yeah, it's everybody.
Yes. I was concerned about that.
I'll bet you were.
As a professor. Okay. James Talmage, who spoke a lot about the apostasy in the early 20th century made the comment that over 1,700 years, there appears to have been silence between the heavens and the earth. So the heavens were basically sealed. Darkness reigned upon the earth in Talmage's version of it.
Yes, and for people like me, who are as old as I am, and Bill as well, um, they're probably going to be wondering, why are you saying things that are so obvious? You might as well say the sky is blue as to say that the church teaches about the apostasy in this way, because it's one of those things gets repeated over and over and over. In fact, it's part of the missionary discussions and the entire raison d'etre for the restoration. This is how we were all raised in the church. But there's a reason that you are nailing this down, though briefly at first, because there are winds that are blowing and are going to try and rip this out of the ground.
Yeah, thanks for framing that, RFM, because we're all familiar with the standard narrative. Talmage even wrote a great book back in 1909 called The Great Apostasy, where he goes into detail about this. You guys did an episode on this a little over a year ago, I believe, and very well done, talking about how these were books that all the missionaries were to have. Of course, the Great Apostasy isn't part of the missionary library now, but Jesus the Christ has been on the missionary list for well over a century.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out, RFM, this is in the missionary discussions, lesson 1 from Preach My Gospel on the Great Apostasy. Just highlighted a few sections there to make the point that the belief is, the standard narrative is that with the death of the apostles, priesthood keys and the presiding priesthood authority were taken from the earth. So that was taken away. Now, I should make a distinction here between the apostasy and what we call the period of the Great Apostasy. The apostasy, the word itself means falling away. So there were reasons for the apostasy. We're all familiar with those. The persecution from without, the wickedness from within, and false teachers. But what resulted from that apostasy or falling away was the withdrawal of the priesthood and keys from the earth was one thing. And notice it says the apostles had kept the doctrine of the gospel pure and maintained order and standard of worthiness for church members. So
that's all over the New Testament. Yeah.
Yeah, that doctrinal purity. I love that term that is still, we use that a lot today. That was what the apostles tried to maintain in the church, even though we know historically that there was no church that Christ even organized, let alone one that had a consistent and pure doctrine. But the narrative goes on in the second paragraph, without revelation and priesthood authority. Now notice, without revelation, that was gone now. And priesthood authority, people relied on human wisdom to interpret the scriptures and the principles and ordinances of the gospel. False ideas were taught as truth.
Yeah.
And then down in the third paragraph, the beginning, after centuries of spiritual darkness. So this is the story that we're telling the investigators.
Yeah. And so this is what we told the investigators when I was on my mission in 1980. And that's what the missionaries taught me in 1978. How about you, Bill?
I knew this. I had this book. You mentioned it was in the missionary library. This was one of the books that everybody was asked to be familiar with. This book was emphasized. And so anyway, that it's the idea that you have to have revelation and priesthood, and that it looks a certain way, and this is what the flavor is, and this is how it's structured, and this is what it means. That's what made us the one true living church, is that we knew exactly how all of this was to be spelled out. We had the answers when everyone else was guessing.
Yeah, and the thing that makes it so crazy is that you got this off the church's website today, correct, Mr. Harrell?
That's right, about 1 hour ago.
And this is what the missionaries are teaching the poor, unsuspecting investigators. Well, they're not unsuspecting yet, but hang on, because this gets juicier. All that we've shown so far is that the church has been entirely consistent over the last 50 years in what they're teaching the missionaries and what they're teaching investigators. But is there anything else afoot, Professor Harrell?
Well, that's what we're going to see. But just to
Ah.
summarize, what was lost or taken, according to this traditional view, is first of all the priesthood and keys. And I link these together in this slide because they're all really dependent on one another. You don't have the priesthood and keys, you can't perform ordinances, saving ordinances, such as baptism, the gift of the Holy Ghost, etc. And without those ordinances, without the gift of the Holy Ghost, there is no spiritual growth, enlightenment. There is no revelation. The Holy Ghost is the revelator. You don't have the gift of the Holy Ghost, you don't have revelation. So doctrinal truth is not discernible. It's not recognizable. So everybody's going to be teaching different doctrines. And that's what we just read from that Preach My Gospel, basically.
Very good.
So there are problems, though, that this has created. People don't like outsiders, don't like this narrative. It's very offensive to Catholics and Protestants. What, you're telling me that my Christian tradition is a sham, that there's nothing there?
I didn't say it. God said it. If you got
Oh.
a problem, take it up with him.
Right. So that's one workaround. Easy. It even bewilders a lot of Latter-day Saints to think that, does it even seem reasonable that God would have abandoned humankind for 1,800 years? Why would he do that? It just makes no sense. And then finally, and increasingly, it contradicts the historical record. Historians are discovering more and more over the past several decades, this isn't new, but they have discovered more and more that the Dark Ages were not that dark, that there was great spiritual and intellectual enlightenment during that period.
Okay. But the Renaissance was still the best, right?
That's what they thought. In fact, it was exactly the Renaissance people who really put down the pre-Renaissance people, saying, and that they're the ones that came up with the term Dark Ages. Everybody that lived before us were living in Dark Ages. We are the enlightened ones.
Right. That's how I feel. But you're saying that's how the people in the Renaissance felt? But they were, are you saying they weren't the best? That they weren't better than the Dark Ages? It was just all PR?
They certainly were better in some aspects. They had some technology that they had developed, obviously. Art was getting developed. And of course, the invention of the printing press spread information, allowed information to be spread like never before. But in terms of intellectual prowess, spiritual attainment, achievement, I think it would be hard to make a case that they were superior than the people in the Middle Ages.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for taking the time to explain that. I was just wondering if I was going to have to, upend my entire worldview of history. Not yet, it seems.
Not yet.
Okay.
So,
now, who is this cat?
Yeah, with those problematic aspects of the traditional narrative, along came a professor of history at BYU, Eric Dursteller. In 2002, he wrote a groundbreaking essay challenging what he called the church's Protestant inherited apostasy narrative. And that's how most scholars view our version of the apostasy today. And when I say most scholars, I'm talking about church scholars.
And it would be fair to say that Talmage himself had borrowed a lot of the Protestant anti-Catholic arguments for his books.
Yes, that's what historians would argue. They would definitely state that. So instead of a time of spiritual and intellectual darkness in which all revelation and indeed progress of any sort disappeared, Dursteller argued that we should have a more expansive, more positive view of the Dark Ages. And as justification and as the historical precedent for revising this view, he quotes from an 1873 sermon by then Apostle John Taylor, soon to be future apostle. Oh, well, he was future apostle.
Future president?
Future president, future president, future prophet and president.
In 4 more years.
Yeah.
Oh, here's the quote. So who knew that this quote would cause so much controversy?
Exactly. Bill, would you mind reading this quote from John Taylor in your best John Taylor voice?
Because the word of wisdom wasn't enforced yet, do we know if John Taylor had a smoky voice or?
Ooh.
He had a very nice tenor voice. Could you sing it for us to the tune of A Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief?
A poor wayfaring man of grief hath often crossed me on my way. He is from England, right? He does have that accent. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you were veering into leprechaun country there at the end.
Well, there's some gold at the end of this rainbow, my friend. So let me get to it. There were men in those dark ages who could commune with God and who, by the power of faith, could draw aside the curtain of eternity and gaze upon the invisible world. There were men who could tell the destiny of the human family and the events which would transpire throughout every subsequent period of time until the final winding up scene. There were men who could gaze upon the face of God, have the ministering of angels, and unfold the future destinies of the world. If those were the dark ages, I pray God to give me a little darkness. John Taylor.
This is wonderful.
1873.
Yeah.
That's usually like the reverse of what Mormons pray for, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
But this is the quote. This is the quote.
It is. And if you followed some of these, I mean, here's an apostle in the restoration saying, that's what I want, what those people in the Dark Ages had.
Yeah, that was great back then when there was no prophets or apostles or priesthood of God or salvation or anything except rats and the plague.
Yeah. And yet they had the heavens open to them. They saw the face of God. They had open visions. They could prophesy all things from the beginning to the end of the world. They knew everything.
Would his audience not be sitting there saying, what on earth are you talking about? Like, I mean, who? You mean Joan of Arc? You mean, I don't know, somebody? Any examples, John?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, when I first read this, that was my thought. Who is he talking about?
And something important, Charles, something important happened when Bill read it. The second time he said Dark Ages, did you notice he reflexively put a "the" in front of it?
Ooh. Okay.
You said, if those were the Dark Ages, I pray God to give me a little darkness, because that is the tendency to elide it into the dark with a capital D, ages with a capital A, as a period of time and before the Renaissance, right?
That's right. So we talk about the classical Dark Ages, the European medieval Dark Ages, right, with that adjective, the Dark Ages.
And then the question is that what John Taylor meant when he's saying Dark Ages, those Dark Ages?
There's another thing going on here too. So he's juxtaposing the current moment he's in and what it means to be in the one true and living church with which the Lord is well pleased in comparison to those dark ages. And he says, if those were dark ages, I pray God to give me a little darkness. In other words, he's implying, I don't know if it's intentional or not, probably not, but he's at least implying to the person listening that those moments were much more gospel-oriented, more revelatory, more profound than this moment he's living in.
Yes, you go to the head of the class, Bill, doesn't he, Professor Harrell?
Yes.
Woo.
What a
bravo.
stop.
You're killing me on the curve, though.
Okay. That's good.
All right, do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah. RFM's grade is going to suffer because of you, Bill.
Mm-hmm. All right. Story of my life.
Yeah. So according to this revisionist view, the apostasy is reframed to be a loss of priesthood and keys, all right, as well as ordinances, because there's no more authority to perform the ordinances. But this spiritual enlightenment, loss of spiritual enlightenment and enrichment disappears. And there's even some question about then doctrinal truths, because as we just read, those people had the heavens open. They saw the whole plan of God from the beginning to the end. So they certainly would have known the eternal truths.
Very good. Yeah, I'm understanding this more and more. Of course, I've seen these slides a couple times before, but this time it's striking home.
Great. Now, interestingly, Dursteller's essay was included in two subsequent scholarly
The professor with the
anthologies.
scarf, the one who started this whole thing by quoting
Yes.
John Taylor and using it to this ill end.
Yes, Eric Dursteller, the infamous BYU historian who
He has
started.
ways of making you talk, Herr Dursteller.
So it was included in these two subsequent anthologies. The first one in 2005, Early Christians in Disarray. Notice it's edited by Noel Reynolds, who will come up a little later.
Yeah.
And then and RFM, you mentioned that you purchased a copy of that when it came out.
I did, and I was waiting for you to get done with the slide, and I'll bring it back to that if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the next one was the 2014 Standing Apart. This was the publication of a series of presentations given at BYU in a symposium on the Great Apostasy.
Now we got to have a symposium about the Great Apostasy.
It was an incredible symposium. They had historians, scholars come in from outside of BYU as well. I think almost all of them were LDS, but and I attended most of those sessions. And I remember at the end, the academic vice president of BYU stood up and he said, "Now, wait a minute. From all I have heard throughout this entire symposium, there is little evidence, if any, that there was a great apostasy. So are we to understand that the only reason we know that there was an apostasy was because there was a restoration?" And there was silence that fell over the audience. As that was the basic implication of everything that had been presented.
There will be some apostasy in your apostasy tour, won't there? They've taken out the apostasy. It's like Hamlet without Hamlet. Standing apart. Mormon historical consciousness and the concept of apostasy. What on earth is going on in the Mormon church? And do you know about this, President Nelson? Okay, so that's 2005, edited by Noel B. Reynolds. He actually was a professor in the ancient scriptures department, right?
He was the dean
politics.
of the College of Philosophy.
Philosophy. Okay.
I don't know. It wasn't a department of philosophy. That wasn't a college.
Okay. So not ancient scripture over in philosophy, but I've read some things.
He taught religion courses, but
Okay.
he was primarily a philosopher.
That's what it is then I was thinking of. The religion courses. Yes. And I did read this 2005 book, Early Christians in Disarray. I mean, I'm trying to be on top of the literature at the time. I have not stopped going to church and would not for another 9 or so years after this. But I read this book, and interesting finding out what's new about the Great Apostasy, and I find out that there's no apostasy in it anymore. And there was a gaping hole in it. And I don't remember anything specific, but I must have read Dursteller's essay because I think it was first. And that set the tone for everything else. And it's like, what do you guys, there's no more apostasy? It's just amazing to me that they were publishing this and that Noel Reynolds was the editor. Yeah. And actually, was this published by the church, Early Christians in Disarray?
That was printed by Farms.
Farms, okay.
And then the Standing Apart was published by the successor to Farms, the Maxwell Institute.
Oh, okay. Very good. So
And
there's Noel Reynolds.
there he is. So he gave a devotional. Notice the year before that was published, as he was compiling the entries for this book. He also picked up on Dursteller, since Dursteller was one of the contributors to the volume.
Mm.
He picked up on the John Taylor quote, used it in his devotional at BYU, Idaho.
Oh no. And next is Uncle Joe.
Then he shared it with Alexander Morrison, who was a general authority and a general authority emeritus when he wrote his book, Turning from the Truth, A New Look at the Great Apostasy.
So it wasn't so great after all.
Quote, yeah.
It wasn't this huge, canyon dip and then climbing up the other side. It was just sort of a little thing in the road.
Yeah, a little dip in the road, pothole. So, yeah, so this was getting some momentum. These were some of the early adopters who jumped on that and began professing an apostasy that wasn't so great and was barely even an apostasy.
Wow. But Dursteller is ground zero.
Yeah. In
And they
fact,
continue.
yeah, the book Standing Apart, by the way, acknowledges Dursteller as being the one who really got the ball rolling on this whole conversation.
Well, no one who speaks German can be all bad.
Okay. The most noted champions of Taylor's remark, Robert Millet and Terrell and Fiona Givens. So everybody knows them in the church. Robert Millet, the longtime popular BYU religion professor, dean of the College of Religion for many years, holder of the Richard L. Evans Chair for Religious Understanding for many years, where he conducted interfaith dialogue with evangelicals. So obviously, this quote was very much valued by him because it addressed the pushback that he was getting from evangelicals that he was interacting with. So he quotes Taylor in 5 books that he published between 2007 and 2017, as well as in other lectures. Now, that's quite a bit to keep coming back to that quote, because it was the linchpin for really justifying this more gentle, gracious view of the apostasy.
And I'm guessing he's getting published by Deseret.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I think most of these are, if not all, are Deseret publications. So he argued that it should put to rest.
Professor, I apologize. For those who aren't members and don't know, Deseret is the publishing arm of the church. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of the LDS Church. So it publishes things that are acceptable to the church and hence are read widely by true believing Mormons.
Good point. They will carry books that they don't necessarily publish and display them in their bookstore, but they will not publish books unless it passes muster.
All right, thank you.
So one of his quotes that he makes regarding Taylor's remark is that it should put to rest the gross exaggeration and misrepresentation that Latter-day Saints believe all of Christian practice and doctrine since the time of the original apostles has been apostate.
Those are heavy weights hanging from slender threads.
It really is. And I've wondered, how is it that some of his evangelical friends never challenged or questioned this? They must have thought, wait a minute, that's not what all your other church leaders had been saying. And
it's not what God told Joseph Smith in the first vision. And it's not what, it's like he's been telling it every time that story's been told, right? Hundreds and millions of times. It's one of the most oft repeated stories in Mormonism.
Yeah. It's a head scratcher. So moving on. Terrell and Fiona Givens, both, and they are advocates of this more expansive Mormonism. That's what they love about Mormonism. And they will appeal to people who are struggling in the church with these teachings that are not official church teachings, but they present it as though it is the real Mormonism. Teachings about the fall, what the fall really was, what the atonement really was, what the apostasy really was, restoration, and so on, to the point where you wonder, what have we been raised with? What do we do with all the church teachings, the legacy that we've received over all these years? So obviously, the Taylor quote was snatched up by them.
Yes.
They quoted in 4 books between 2013, 2022, plus a lot of different articles and talks and interviews that they have given.
This has been going on for a long time, and crazier things can happen. But with scholars of this magnitude using this quote this many times, I have a hard time believing that they didn't take a few minutes to read the damn thing in context.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it? And if you've noticed, all the names that we've looked at so far, and these aren't the only ones that have been promoting it, but these are high level people in Mormonism, respected people. And I respect
until tonight.
Excuse me?
Respected people until tonight. By the way, Professor Harrell, I think at this point, I just want to let everybody know how I approach the show and why it is that I'm so exercised about this entire subject is because what I did was Professor Harrell sent me a copy of his paper, and I got around to reading it yesterday because there was that whole thing and, you know, St. George and everything. But very, very excited about it and knew that it was something that we wanted to cover just based upon how you had described it. And the fact it was published in Dialogue is just an additional plus. But I started reading it and realized it was about this quote by John Taylor. It occurs early on in your paper, and also with its citation to the Journal of Discourses in volume 16. So I happen to have an entire copy of the Journal of Discourses, courtesy of a very, very nice listener and former guest on the show who didn't have any more need for them. So they came my way. And I thought, look, before I go any further, I'm going to just go ahead and read the talk because these aren't horribly long. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages. They're, you know, double columned, but 6 pages. It's not going to kill you to read it in context. And the reason I did that was because if I have the opportunity, and it's not too much trouble, frankly, I would like to read a document that's going to be disputed. It's obvious there's going to be a disputation about what it means. I want to read it first for myself in context so I can form my own conclusions about it and then listen to what it is that you say it says and see if that lines up with my own experience in reading it. So the thing that blew my mind was I read through this and I came away from it and I thought, there is no person in their right mind who could read this talk by John Taylor and think that that quote had to do with the Middle Ages. And that's why when I continued to read your paper, I came back to it and read your paper, and I'm reading all these people who are doing exactly that. I'm getting angrier and angrier at these people whose books I've bought and read, like Robert Millet, especially back in the 1980s. Terrell and Fiona got their books, read them as well. And it's like, what are you doing? That was my experience.
Yeah. And we're going to get to a little more at the end. I'd like to talk about what started. I mean, how did this get started and how did it continue to persist? And you know, your question is very well. What's going through their minds? Yes. Why wouldn't they have read the entire thing? If they had, surely they would have discovered that John Taylor was not talking about the Dark Ages.
No chance. Not 1 in 1,000 was he talking about the Middle Ages, the Dark Age, Middle Ages, right? No way. So then the question is going to end up being, and I don't mean to get to the questions yet, are these people doing it unknown to the church, or are they the pawns of the church, sending out references and citations and teachings of a very different kind of apostasy in a plan to eventually move over completely to that version?
This is made more complicated. You know, you and I did an episode a few months back where we showed Terrell Gibbons explaining to everybody Joseph Smith's library and him telling you the books and where things came from. And Terrell Gibbons implies strongly that he is a scholar of the sort who reads things. Reads great literature like you are, FM. He reads books. When he talks about Joseph Smith's library,
He reads the originals, though.
he talks about reading things from front to back and figuring out what from the book made its way into Mormonism.
Yeah.
So to say this is an accident, that he's just reading a partial quote, he just didn't do the homework on his end, that's going to be a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
Wow. Good point.
It's sort of inexcusable given his caliber of scholarship and credentials.
Well, Professor, I'm going to have to ask you for a definition on the phrase "sort of inexcusable." Okay.
Well, there could be other reasons, and so I'm far be it for me to.
Someone held a gun to his head. Fiona, maybe.
Who knows?
Someone held a gun to his head and said, "You include that quote, damn it," and you misuse it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how they almost use the quote to beat people over the head with it. It's like in the last thing, if you go back that slide, the statement that they make in the book, RFM.
It's
Can you go
like
back
the whole
a slide?
thing. I'm so sorry. Am I supposed to advance the slide?
No, go back a slide.
Oh, go back a slide. That was okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I was thinking about something.
So what they argued is that, and this is their quotes, it should shame, Taylor, they're saying that Taylor's remark should shame those moderns who believe the medieval church was a spiritual wasteland. Almost like shame on you. Don't you know that?
Don't you know that
John Taylor.
we're into misattributing or misusing this quote, this obscure quote, this never ever used quote from a never ever used talk by John Taylor. Don't you know that that's what we're doing now in creating a completely different version of the apostasy based upon a misinterpretation of this quote? I mean, and their whole end game is what? Just to sound more ecumenical, more enlightened, more beneficent about the poor people in the Dark Ages and how benighted they were.
Yeah, there's certainly motivation for their use of Taylor in this way.
Okay. It just seems that obviously, okay, it doesn't seem like something that I would think was important as far as a message or a position to take or make known. But obviously, these people do. Obviously, Bob Millett thinks it's important. Obviously, the Gibbonses think it's important enough to engage in this kind of scholarly malfeasance.
Mm-hmm.
There, I said it.
Great.
All right. You want to go forward with the slide now?
Let's go on, because there are a couple articles and lectures that Terrell was involved in where he used the quote. And in the letter to a doubter, I think a lot of the listeners are familiar with this article, and it was published in Interpreter and numerous other places. But in that, he relates a response he gave to a dissident. So people were leaving the church. So Terrell Gibbons was one of several who were out on tour trying to draw people back into the church. And his discussion with one dissident was the dissident complained, saying that he thought it was absurd that God was sort of snoozing until 1820. So Gibbons comes back to him saying, well, guess what? That sounds absurd to Mormons as well. And as proof, he quotes John Taylor's effusive adulation for Dark Age spiritual enlightenment.
To jump back in here for a second, Gibbons is one of the first, if not the first. I hadn't heard it elsewhere. Maybe it's elsewhere. You of all people might know this, but Gibbons was the first person I can recollect hearing talking about, well, the woman went into the wilderness, he does that whole spiel. and he got creative in using that scripture in saying, you know, the woman represents the church. It didn't go into oblivion. It just went and hid on the outskirts until it was going to be welcomed back again. And there's a thing we do in apologetics where we find the cool little thing, but it's interesting. It entertains people, but it's not sufficient enough. And it almost feels to me like he goes and gets this one to sort of as proof text to sort of substantiate the cool idea of the woman going into the wilderness.
Yeah.
Good point. Now, I think this is becoming a little bit clearer to me now, Professor. So maybe, at least in part then, this argument, this quote from John Taylor is being used as an apologetic of sorts against the very reasonable question of why it is that God didn't do anything between the Great Apostasy starting and 1830 in upstate New York. Was he snoozing? So if we can misuse this quote by John Taylor, then we can show no, he wasn't, because he was still giving revelations to people and all of these wonderful spiritual gifts. Do I have it?
Yes. And not only that, but he says that sounds absurd to Mormons, like everybody in the church knows this. No, this is an obscure comment by John Taylor, you know, this apostle several hundred years ago, and you're bringing it up like it's everybody's aware of this.
It's gaslighting.
Yeah.
This is educated gaslighting 101.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard about this quote from John Taylor back in seminary. That's supposed to be funny, but okay, it's a tough crowd.
Did you hear that?
No, because that's what people say. They just lie their ass off in order to, like the Temple Spire doctrine, right? Pretty soon they're going to say, yeah, I heard about that back in seminary.
Yes.
You create instant historicity just by misremembering or flat out lying.
Yeah. Yeah. The seer stone, that Joseph Smith didn't use the Urim and Thummim. We haven't hid that. That's been talked about for decades, and it's in one obscure issue of the New Era or something. And
yes, 1970.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
The Improvement Era, I think.
yeah.
Yeah, before it became the Ensign. And the Ensign is all that's available on the church website. You can't even find the issue in which that was mentioned.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm thinking about the First Vision. Anyway, in the same year, apparently, this guy, Terrell Givens, he also quoted Taylor in a lecture given at the University of Notre Dame.
Exactly. So you got a bunch of Catholic students there, and how appropriate. I mean, wow, he's not going to come in quoting the First Vision. He's going to come in quoting John Taylor, showing that, hey, you guys had it right all along. You know, the Catholic Church you were right there.
He is such a quisling.
Yeah, very clever.
And he continues to use it. This is obviously one of his faves.
What's a quisling?
A quisling?
Yeah. Well,
Quisling, let's see. It's a traitor who collaborates with an enemy force occupying their country.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll be here all week.
All right. Nice.
That's good. So yeah, they published the quote in 4 of the books that they've published together, and used it to that same effect of saying, you know, we have a very expansive, very inclusive theology. Why wouldn't everybody love Mormonism? We recognize God's dealings with humans and his gracious outpouring of divine gifts in all ages of the world. So it's just a little disingenuous.
And I read the first 2 of those books, The Crucible of Doubt, 2014, The God Who Weeps, 2017. Yeah, no wonder I'm getting this repeatedly. But I was very, very dyed in the wool. You know, I know what the apostasy is. And I also know that there is a peril in lessening the effect of the Great Apostasy, which is if you don't really have an apostasy, you don't really need a restoration. That's the danger involved in this game they're playing, this cat and mouse game.
Yeah. As well as what do we do with the legacy of prophetic teachings in the church
Mhm.
that have said all along, this is a loss of spiritual truth? The heavens were closed. God was not pouring out spiritual manifestations and opening the heavens to these people during the medieval period.
Right. If you can get that stuff without the priesthood, what do you need the priesthood for?
There you go.
I know you're going to end up saying ordinances, but it's going to get really limited really fast.
And
Other,
that's what's happening. Yeah.
other Taylor Trouts. Who are these guys?
Other Taylor touts, not trouts.
I know one of these guys. I got one of these guys' phone number.
Yeah, you've um, uh, Jared Halverson has been in the limelight a lot recently.
Yes, he has.
So both he and Jim Faulkner, also out of the Department of Philosophy at BYU, they both also jumped on this quote and
Mm.
found it to be, wow, this is the more inclusive Mormonism that we would like to subscribe to. Even a Mormon wiki article, it's an LDS-oriented encyclopedia, quotes Taylor to show that revelation continued during the Dark Ages.
I wonder if this next page is going to be the really big one. It is.
Whoa.
Tell us about this.
So this is, the church has now adopted it. In the CES program, the 2016 New Testament Seminary Teacher Manual quotes Taylor, saying that it had specific reference to those who sought truth during the Dark Ages.
Yeah, I looked this up myself and found it, and I went, oh my gosh. Either the church is being really sneaky, or is it has sneaky little brownies coming at night and adding things to the souls of the lessons. Here's what it says. President John Taylor said the following regarding those who sought truth during the Dark Ages. Okay, that's the intro. During the Dark Ages, the capital D, capital A, the Dark Ages, as in the Middle Ages. Okay,
Right.
so now they're vouching for and clarifying that they really, really are reading this wrong.
Yeah.
All right, and then it's going to quote it. I want to just read it again, if that's okay. Once again, this is in the Seminary Teacher's Manual for the New Testament. It was 2016, but it's up on the website.
It's the current.
It's the current one. This is what they're teaching.
Yeah.
And then they quote, after having said, President John Taylor said the following regarding those who sought truth during the Dark Ages, quote, there were men in those dark ages who could commune with God and who by the power of faith could draw aside the curtain of eternity and gaze upon the invisible world. Oh, they have it so wrong. Have the ministering of angels and unfold the future destinies of the world. If those were dark ages, I pray God to give me a little darkness and deliver me from the light and intelligence that prevail in our day. In Journal of Discourse 16197. Now, I've got to tell you something. It's astonishing that this is coming up and being introduced now in official church correlated manuals and materials, right? The other thing is that when they included that last part of the sentence, it also threw off the interpretation, I think, because they included the line, it says, give me a little darkness, comma, and deliver me from the light and intelligence that prevail in our day. And all of a sudden you're going, wait a second, there's things being referenced outside of this quote that I need to understand in order to figure out what it is John Taylor means. What do you think about this, Bill? If you have any thoughts about the fact this is actually now part of the CES system.
We have yet to get to putting this in context, correct?
That's right.
So we still have to, I mean, the audience knows where we're going, but we still have to surprise the audience with the unveiling of what the real meaning is.
Hello.
Here's what I'll say. I'll go back to the beginning. The church chose, again, they're the ones who have the direct conduit to God. I'm not allowed to decide what doctrine is. They do. They're the ones who asked me to buy the Great Apostasy. They're the ones who put the definition of the Great Apostasy into their books. They're the ones who decided that we have the Spirit, trust what we say, we see around corners. This is how the Great Apostasy is defined. And now suddenly it's become more convenient to not have any great apostasy at all. And now everybody's going digging for quotes. And as the audience already is understanding where we're going, this quote isn't going to mean what you thought it did. And hence now you're turning things on its head, changing things upside down, and you don't even have a real justification to do so. They would have been better off, and I wanted to mention this sometime during tonight's show, they would have been better off using Orson F. Whitney's quotes, where he talks about, and I got it here because I used it a ton of times early in my time with the Mormon discussion. Perhaps the Lord needs such men on the outside of his church to help it along. They are among its auxiliaries and can do more for the cause where the Lord has placed them than anywhere else. He says again, God is using more than one people for the accomplishment of his great and marvelous work. The Latter-day Saints cannot do it all. It is too vast, too arduous for any one people. They would have been better. And again, that sort of speaks to the churches on the earth. And while it's on the earth, there are these other facets of people doing God's work as well. But it would have at least had more real substance to it than the direction we're going with once we put this quote in real context.
It is a beautiful quote. And I know it's going to be focusing in on priesthood, like you'd mentioned earlier, Professor Harrell.
Mhm.
And once again, if you're going to soften up the great apostasy and just limit it to the priesthood wasn't here, you're going to really have more and more people, I think, saying, well, what about the three Nephites and John the Beloved wandering about? Because you actually, if you're going to limit the apostasy, the great apostasy, just there was no priesthood, well, Mormon doctrine says it was present on the earth and could have been conferred and passed on.
Whoops.
Rutro, Raggy.
Yeah. Oh, so wait. Hey, go back just a second, because one of the questions that we raised earlier was, who were these people in the Dark Ages? And this seminary teacher manual kind of fishes around for that. And notice if you read that, it says prior to that first underlined yellow, these reformers sought to realign Christianity with the scriptures. So it's kind of like the church knows that the reformers were inspired people.
And that's old. We know that.
Yeah. And they were just coming out of the Dark Ages, kind of, if we extend the Dark Ages into almost a little part of the Renaissance. So they're kind of fitting those reformers into this category of those people that John Taylor may have been talking about. Because then after the quote, it says, for additional information regarding the faithful efforts of these reformers, see Thomas's one. So I thought that was interesting.
I see what you're saying. Yep. And I think what you're saying is they're trying to say that the reformers, when I joined the church in 78, the reformers this, the reformers that, and the reformers were great, especially where they lined up with Mormonism or Mormonism's interest, right? That's why they were men of God raised up by God in order to make it so Mormonism could become a church and become so great.
Yeah.
But now what you're saying is that this quote from John Taylor, which is not about anything like that, is by virtue of the introduction in the church material trying to force the reformers into being these people he's talking about in the Dark Ages.
You guys, you hit on this sort of, but this person's hitting it right on the head. John the Apostle did in fact pass the priesthood on, because he is the person of the three. There's three that show up. Two are spirit personages, and one is someone who never tasted of death. John the Apostle did in fact pass the priesthood on because he showed up in person to ordain Joseph Smith. The priesthood was never off the earth.
What kind of grade would you give Danny, Professor?
Oh, I think he's spot on in terms of identifying what happened, but that gets into the messiness
Allegedly.
of our Mormon theology and how we explain different things and how there's inconsistencies within our explanations.
Well, hopefully you can help us understand what this quote really means.
Okay, so as I read the quote multiple times and read more significantly, read other people reading or using the quote and wondering, are you sure that's what he means? These are some of the questions that I had. Why would Taylor ascribe spiritual experiences of biblical proportion to people in the Dark Ages? I mean, these were things that were reserved for prophets in the Bible.
Yeah,
And
and for
yet,
those who don't know, I mean, as a Mormon, we all understand that this is not what Mormonism teaches or what it has ever taught. And so using this quote stands out like a sore thumb because it doesn't match any of hundreds of other times we've heard about the apostasy described in the traditional way.
exactly. And why does he disregard the basis, priesthood and gift of the Holy Ghost, on which spiritual blessings are predicated? So this is the standard LDS narrative has always been, you don't have the priesthood, you don't have ordinances, you don't have ordinances, you don't have the gift of the Holy Ghost, you're not entitled to revelation. Why has no other church leader ever ascribed this level or come close to ascribing that level of spirituality to people in the Dark Ages? So when we talk about the reformers, those who were kind of carrying out God's purposes, they weren't doing it through this open vision from God. Even that narrative has them working through the promptings of the light of Christ. It's a dimmer light that they were operating under. It wasn't the full light of the Holy Ghost. How does John Taylor know there were people in the Dark Ages who experienced the specific manifestations he mentioned?
Yes.
Who were these people? And that's part of the mystique of his whole statement. You read it and you think, wow, does he have insight? He knows of people that I've never heard of who had these kinds of experiences. How amazing is that? And why did it take 130 years for anyone to notice Taylor's astonishing remark? I mean, nobody ever quoted Taylor in that way. So those were questions that I thought, I got to get to the bottom of this.
Do you know if the individual who started using this, Dursteller, in 2002, that's the first time this has ever been quoted? Were you ever able to?
Yeah.
First time ever quoted at all for any reason?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like how your mind works, Professor Harrell.
It's just,
you see the thing, you know, why did that show up late and no one used it before? Let me go figure that out.
Yeah. Let's get to the bottom of it. There is a bottom.
This is something from your article. May I have the honor?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Taylor's high praise and holy envy for this remarkable spiritual outpouring during the Dark Ages clearly runs counter to the traditional LDS view of the Middle Ages as a time of spiritual blackout.
Yeah, that's the traditional narrative.
Yes.
So the first thing I was curious about is, what were Taylor's teachings about revelation? How did he understand revelation occurred if he's going to attribute this kind of open visions and revelations to these people in the Dark Ages? And turning to his Government of God book, published in 1852, he said, the world has been ignorant of God and his laws, not having had any communication with him for 1,800 years.
A hard stop. That sounds different.
Whoa, yeah. Is this the same John Taylor?
Well, it's sometime earlier, 1852, 1873. What is that, 21 years? He could change his mind.
Yeah, he could, except for what volume of Journal of Discourse? That was volume 19, right?
This one is 16. The one in which the quote,
16.
misused. Yeah, that's in 16.
So we know that these two quotes here are later, right? He said, a person cannot come to a knowledge of God, nor become acquainted with eternal things without the gospel, without the gift of the Holy Ghost.
That's problematic. By the way, finishing your thought, Professor Harrell, we know that these are later because the volume of the Journal of Discourse is higher.
Yes. For those who aren't following along.
Just in case the midnight morons are watching.
So then he says, even the great reformers. We talked about, could it be the reformers? Well, according to Taylor, he said, even the great reformers groped in the dark because they lacked the light of revelation which the ancient saints enjoyed. Even the reformers did not have the level of revelation that was needed that you can have when the church is upon the earth.
Okay.
It wasn't
And
there.
those were our last hope.
Yeah. So this is just a sampling, by the way, of his teachings. I have others in the article where he just pounds this home that you have to have the priesthood. You have to have the gift of the Holy Ghost. There is no revelation without it. So concluding from that, one can only conclude that his 1873 remark was either a slip of the tongue, an inaccurate transcription, or it's been misread. So I have to rule out it being a slip of the tongue. It could be just
Process
an
of
outlier,
elimination.
but maybe it was legitimate, and it could be.
Mhm.
An inaccurate transcription, don't have any way to really confirm that unless we go back to the original.
Why is one possibility not that he simply is contradicting himself at a different time? That is, how many times in Mormonism have people contradicted themselves? It's happened quite a bit. Why not that possibility? Now, again, there's enough on the record that it would seem like this is the weak point, and it still is a deception, because you need to acknowledge Taylor's teaching it the other way on multiple occasions. He seems consistent outside of this one remark, but why not go, Mormons just contradict themselves all the time in trying to defend the church.
Can I answer this question?
Please.
Oh, okay. I was waiting on the professor to see if he would call on me.
Oh, but before you do, RFM,
Well, he's too smart.
Bill, notice that where the period is at the end of that series, there is no more room to put another option. That's
Right.
why that possibility is not included. No, I'm just kidding. RFM.
Yeah, I think what you're going to end up showing with the quotes that you've dug up in your wonderful research, Professor Harrell, is that this is obviously being misread, because there are other quotes that are virtually identical from other people, his contemporaries and leaders in the church, are just saying the damn thing, except it's not so vague that it can even be argued about. It's obviously talking about the Old Testament times or the New Testament times. In other words, the times when the church was on the earth, right, anciently, but they didn't have a Bible yet, because the Bible is superior to having visions of God.
Yeah, good point. But Bill, I love that option, that possibility, because we naturally assume that prophets are consistent in their teachings, and that is not that is an unwarranted assumption.
Yes.
I learned that in your book. This is my doctrine.
Oh,
Wow.
change all the time. Yeah, nobody was consistent.
The student has become the teacher. Okay, well, I'm really excited about the rest of this stuff. Are we ready to go to the next slide, Professor?
We better, we'll never get through it.
Here we go.
So I thought, let's look closer. Let's actually read the sermon, find out what he was talking about. And the first thing I noticed, just even looking at the remark, he starts saying there were men in those dark ages who could commune with God, and so forth. And it occurred to me that a lot of times when this is quoted, I notice this in Terrell Givens, he replaces men with individuals. So right there, he's twisting kind of the verbiage so that it sounds broader, more general. We're not talking about prophets here. We're talking about any righteous person.
Oh.
And then he says, in those dark ages, not the dark ages, those dark ages. So there has to be an antecedent, obviously, for him to say those dark ages. What was the antecedent of those? So you have to look back earlier.
I'm sorry, Cardinellis wants to know what an antecedent is.
Okay, help him out.
Antecedent means what is the proper noun that you're referring to? In other words, it has to be earlier on, because this is obvious when you say those dark ages. It's referring to a more explicit, noun that happened before the quote started.
Yeah.
It implies that something had to have been said before this that would define what those is.
Exactly. Yeah. But interestingly, as you go back over his entire sermon, Taylor never mentions the post-biblical period in his sermon. he talks a lot about the biblical period and Book of Mormon people,
Yeah.
never once talks about the time or people or anything post-biblical.
Never once. And I've read it just today or yesterday or whenever it was. No, it talks about New Testament times, Old Testament times, Book of Mormon times, but nothing after that.
Yeah. So it seems, therefore, that he is not referring to the Dark Ages, the European Dark Ages.
And I'm sorry. And when he's talking about those times, he's talking about all the visions and the revelations that they had. That's his whole point.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go on.
Okay.
And as you look back over the sermon, you realize that Taylor was simply parodying the sectarians who disparagingly referred to biblical times as Dark Ages. So what he's saying is, every time we talk to, have a discussion about visions and revelations and everything with the sectarians, they say, oh, well, that happened in the Dark Ages of the Bible. We don't need those today. So parodying the sectarians, he says, Taylor kind of puts these words in their mouth, in former ages, referring to biblical times, when the people were degraded and in darkness, it was necessary that he should communicate intelligence to the human family. But we live in the blaze of the gospel day, in an age of light and intelligence.
Because that is what they believe, the sectarians, correct?
For the most part, those who were cessationists, and we'll get to that term.
Yes. And it took me just a while to get my head around this. So here's how I understand it, okay? Which is basically the other religionists, right? The ones that believe the Bible is the word of God and that's it. And there's no more spiritual gifts. And we have those around us today as well. And they did then. And so what those Christians would say is this: we only have the Bible. We don't have spiritual gifts and revelations and visions. Therefore, the Bible is superior, okay? The Bible is superior to the gifts and the revelations. And of course, you have to say that when you believe only the Bible and you don't have any gifts of the Spirit or revelations. The Bible has to be the top of the food chain because you've got it and that's all you've got. And therefore, you turn the story on its head, at least from a Mormon point of view, and you say that no gifts of the Spirit and only the Bible is superior. And back in the Bible times, when they have all these revelations and gifts of the Spirit and miracles, that was an inferior form of the gospel that they had to have in order to kick them in the ass and get them moving. Those were actually the Dark Ages because they didn't have the Bible. They only had the spiritual gifts. Now we're in the time of light and intelligence because we are superior and have the Bible and none of the gifts because we don't need them anymore. They're inferior. Boy, I went on and on, but I felt like I needed to in order to say it 3 times in different ways.
Oh yeah, well that was precisely the apologetic that they used. They didn't have revelations, so how do you square that with the biblical times? You have to say that we're better off than what they were. We have the Bible. We don't need those revelations.
So Mormon's big selling point at the time, at least, about we've got gifts of the Spirit and revelation from God. Here's the Book of Mormon. It is revelation. And they say, what are you talking about? That belongs to those Dark Ages back in Bible times when they needed those kinds of gifts of the Spirit.
Yeah. And so that's where in the CES quote from John Taylor, they included that, I'd rather have those Dark Ages where there were these visions than live in than all the light and glory of the current day that you profess with just the Bible. So in other words, they're saying that we have we live in this age of light and intelligence. And John Taylor and the other saints are scratching their heads saying, what are you saying that's superior than having the actual visions and manifestations that the Bible only talks about?
Mm-hmm.
It made no sense.
Okay. Had you gotten through the end of this slide?
Well, just that he contends, Taylor's comeback to that argument or apologetic is that whenever a man had a knowledge of these spiritual things, these spiritual outpourings, they had a knowledge of the gospel. In other words, they had the gospel. And he reiterates that 10 times in his sermon,
yes,
that you have to have the gospel. This wasn't available to people. It isn't available to you today because you don't have the gospel. That's why.
Right. Some people, it looks like in the live chat, are making fun of John Taylor's neck beard. I don't think that's very nice. I mean, he reminds me of one of the members of the Country Bear Jamboree. Next slide.
Oh. So, looking outside of the sermon, is this the only time Taylor ever used this rhetoric in talking about the Dark Ages? Well, it turns out that there are a number of instances in which he said essentially the same kind of thing, but even makes it more explicit that he's referring to the Dark Ages of the Bible, falsely so called by the sectarians.
Mm.
So as early as 1840, in a pamphlet he wrote, he parodied the Methodist dismissal of Revelation, saying apostles and prophets and inspired men were only necessary for the Dark Ages. So notice he's making it explicit now that these apostles and prophets, say these sectarians, were only necessary for the Dark Ages. But as we have now got a more efficient ministry, we can perfect the saints without it.
Okay.
In 1870, in these Dark Ages referred to, the gospel was preached to Abraham, to Melchizedek, to Moses, etc. So
that's not the Middle Ages.
It's clear as day, what he's referring to. 1876, so this is after the 1873 statement. He said prophets lived back in what they, contemporary Christians, now call the Dark Ages. And then this is the one I really like. Some people think that Abraham was a kind of shepherd with very few more ideas than a mushroom. Interesting expression. That he lived in the Dark Ages and did not comprehend much.
Oh, Abraham lived in the Dark Ages, huh?
Yeah. That's what the sectarians were teaching, according to Taylor, at least.
Yeah, he was the Merchant of Venice. There's no record of Taylor ever using the term Dark Ages to refer to the Middle Ages. Is that true?
In none of the teachings I could find, none of his writings, none of his sermons, not once does he ever use the term Dark Ages to refer to the European Dark Ages, to the Middle Ages.
Wow. Well, that's a huge blow to the interpretation being promoted by those Mormon scholars.
Yeah, so I think that makes it pretty clear what he was referring to when he used the term Dark Ages. So just by way of background, and one of the reasons that this misinterpretation is a little bit inexcusable, although I won't, that's why I say it's sort of inexcusable. There was a whole rhetoric that existed in the 19th century in Mormonism that disappeared. It's disappeared. And we've lost that in our institutional memory. We don't remember that. So when we read things today, Dark Ages, we give a presentist reading to it and assume that, oh, you're talking about the European Dark Ages. And it's only because we're not familiar with the debates that were taking place during the 19th century. And what those sectarians are called, who say that spiritual gifts were done away with after the church was lost, we call them cessationists. Okay, so that was their justification for the Reformation, for starting their church and dismissing Catholicism. That after Catholicism ended, we have these gifts that were no longer around, but we don't need them anymore. They were only necessary during a time of darkness.
Yes.
So I've got a couple quotes here, one from William Harness.
So it's like the Mormons recognize the same thing, but for the Mormons, the cessation of spiritual gifts is a bad thing. But for the cessationists, it's a good thing.
Yeah. And I should have finished my thought there when I said that the reformers were using that as a bad thing because John Wesley, and this is one of the puzzling things that I have a long footnote in the article, Methodists were actually uh, continuationists. That's the name for those who believe that spiritual gifts continued. But that is, they would have been continuationists had they believed that there had not been an apostasy. But they believe that the Catholic Church was in apostasy, that they had to reform or restore the primitive Christianity to get those gifts back.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, many of the primitivists in Joseph Smith's environment believed the same thing. Mormonism picked up that same banner and claimed that we're the restorationists. We're the ones who are bringing these gifts back. So yes, for some, cessationism was a bad thing. For others, it was their justification for their particular movement.
Very good. But this is the context, and the people to whom John Taylor is directly, though rhetorically, responding in this quote. Is that right?
Yes. I wanted to include at least a couple quotes from these people that John Taylor kept referring to, who referred to biblical times as the Dark Ages. And so one is this Anglican preacher who said those ancient prophets and apostles were, for the most part, poor and uneducated men. And it took extraordinary illumination, from God to cut through their habits and prejudices. So it's like they were thick-headed. You know, they needed this additional light. We don't need that extreme light today that they needed.
Okay, very good. Yeah.
Jonathan Edwards said a similar thing, that it was the revelations for the apostles and prophets were to enable them to reveal the mind and will of God before the canon of Scripture was complete. These immediate revelations imparted a reflected light in the night or in a dark season.
In a dark season.
Yeah.
It sounds like Dark Ages.
Yeah.
So when John Taylor is saying, you know, the Dark Ages and everything, he's speaking, well, is it sardonically, sarcastically? But what he's talking about is not the Middle Ages. He's talking about the times described in the Bible when there were men on the earth who received all of these revelations from God and saw all these visions as described in the Bible. And when you understand that, which, by the way, is made quite clear if you just read the whole talk by John Taylor, that that's what he means. Once you understand that, then it makes complete sense what he's saying.
Yes. And as we move on to the next slide, we discover that there is an entire anti-cessationist rhetoric that was going on in the church throughout the 19th century that included more than just John Taylor.
Oh, other people talked about this in the church.
Yeah. So I found at least 10 other elders and church leaders employing similar rhetoric to Taylor, denouncing cessationism. Most notably, Wilford Woodruff, who on at least 7 occasions between 1815 and 1895 made similar comments. Now, that 1815 is not a mistake. In 2 of his conference talks, in I think 1892 and 1895, he said, I remember distinctly as an 8-year-old child hearing these congregational ministers saying, we don't need visions and revelations anymore. Those were only needed for the Dark Ages. And he relates how even at that young age of 8 years old, that just baffled him, that why wouldn't we want that today? You know, if that was so valuable then, why not today?
Wasn't at least a part of that sentiment expressed by the Protestant minister in the endowment?
Yeah. That do they still have that?
Well, no, they axed him in 1990.
Yeah. So he's out.
But I think so. I think he dissed not only on Well, he dissed on miracles, right? An arm, if you can do miracles, cut your arm off and restore it because there are no more miracles today. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So I've done a little bit of research on cessationism, and I could not find contemporary explanations of cessationism that disparagingly refer to the biblical period as dark ages or dark times. Only that we have the Bible now, we have the light of Christ, the light of the gospel. We don't need open revelation like they had it in the past.
So this is a bit of an apologetic tactic, almost a straw man, the way that the Mormons are describing the cessationist viewpoint on biblical times, calling it the Dark Ages.
Yeah, it's almost a caricature
Yeah, that's a good way of putting
of
it.
their apologetic.
Yeah.
And that's what we see. So, Bill, if you got a minute, you could read, since you did Taylor so well, would you read this little excerpt from Wilford Woodruff and pay attention, audience, to the similarity of what Woodruff says to what Taylor said.
Hey, Bill, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I was doing the call-in studio and I hit the mute button. I'm sorry. I was
It's
muted.
okay.
All right.
It could happen
Do you
anyway.
want me to read the above part 2 or just the quote itself?
Ask any portion. Ask any
Right.
tuna.
Ask any portion of Christendom why the ancient order of the Church of Christ is not among them, apostles, prophets, revelations, and other gifts, and they will inform you that they were only needed in the dark ages of the world to establish the kingdom of God, but in this enlightened age are not necessary. May the Lord give me such periods of darkness
Oh my gosh.
as were enjoyed by the apostles and saints of old.
He is saying, I'm sorry.
194.
Yeah, JD, Journal of Discourses, Volume 2, 194. I said it again because I sorry. I thought you were done. But my gosh, that's exactly what John Taylor says in that quote, only that it is so specific that it cannot be misinterpreted, but should at a minimum be used to inform us on what it is John Taylor means.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we have a problem in Mormonism, and we're all guilty of this. We proof text things, we just pull it out of context without looking at the immediate context, at least. And then here, this is the broader context. We're just totally oblivious to this entire 19th century anti-cessationist rhetoric that was going on in Mormonism. I mean, we have dozens of instances in the literature of people making these kinds of comments.
I got to ask you, because this is such a great quote on this issue. How did you feel when you found this one?
I thought, wow, wait, is this Woodruff or Taylor saying this? So, conclusion. In the article, I basically conclude that his praise of the profuse spirituality during the Dark Ages has been carelessly misinterpreted.
Or intentionally misinterpreted.
Or intentionally. So this is the charitable conclusion.
Can I say something? I'll just jump in.
Yeah.
The reason you guys are having that little banter right there, I'll just note, when the church defends the 1978 revelation giving all people the priesthood, and by defended, I don't mean it was a bad move that they spun around to make good. What I mean is that it was a great move, but it's contrary to what the church said about people of color and how the priesthood would be lost and gained back again. There's a quote from Brigham Young where he says that, yes, people of color will get the priesthood, but it'll be long after the millennium and Christ's reign and all that. And then the church simply takes that quote, deletes the end of it, maybe throws an ellipses in if they care, and then presents it as if this is what Brigham Young said, without notifying the audience that what they're actually sharing with the audience is a failed prophecy not a fulfilled one.
Mm.
And then there's other instances where paying tithing, who has means, which is deleted and ellipses is put in place. And so I just note to the audience, for anybody watching who hasn't been watching the show for a while, just note that it isn't out of the ordinary for church leadership to intentionally misrepresent quotes in order to get members to see early church leaders and the things they said in a certain light, when it is either way different and sometimes even the polar opposite of what was said.
The LDS Church, where every year is 1984.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh,
Okay.
that's insane. And we've got an interesting quote at the end that just you hit the nail on the head, Bill, with that. So yeah, in fact, in the article, part of my conclusion is I applaud this revisionist narrative of the apostasy. We ought to be more generous and charitable and inclusive in our perception of how God is. Why should he be any less abundant in his outpouring of his gracious mercies and insights to all people? I mean, it just makes sense.
That's not the crux, though. The crux is that they don't want to admit that they were wrong. That's the crux. Once you go, we need to identify that we were wrong without telling people we were wrong. So let's just do a bait and switch and proof text some other quote and have it mean something it doesn't mean.
And on top of that, I think that to the extent that the LDS Church permits God's blessings and manifestations and visions to be going on in the lives of non-members, to that same extent, they diminish the power of the priesthood they claim to hold.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the biggest gripes that people that are leaving the church, that they have with the church, is that it's not honest in the way it presents the information. If you want to present information, even if it's good information, you don't have to be deceitful about the way that it's presented and how it was taught in the past. Just be upfront and say, yeah, they were wrong. Let's we've moved on. We have greater light and knowledge. I mean, we have the mechanism to simply say, you know, we've got greater light and knowledge to move on. Elder McConkie said that they were laboring under, a lesser light than what we have today.
Yeah, but if you say that too many times, people start to wonder why they place any trust in you at all.
Well, I know 3.5 years after the policy of exclusion, they reversed it, right? And everybody got whiplash. That one was so fast.
That was quick.
I think it set the record.
Yeah, normally it's 4 decades, but that was fast. So
the other concern in the conclusion, just that last paragraph, it's not just disturbing that Taylor gets misinterpreted, even though it's for a good cause, but it kind of it does violence to John Taylor's total record of teachings about the apostle, about revelation, and it does not represent John Taylor at all. So that's a concern.
Very good.
It's unfortunate, and hopefully that's the kind of thing I would like to see stopped.
Have you ever reached out to Terrell Givens to notify him of this research?
No, I haven't.
Well, it is published in Dialogue. He may have a subscription.
Yeah, maybe.
And I respect Terrell Givens. He's very bright, very intelligent.
What do you respect him for specifically?
He's a very eloquent speaker, articulate in his speech, eloquent writer.
Bricolage. Yeah.
So, he's got the credentials. He's got good scholarship. I think he just is guilty oftentimes of having an agenda and
Mm,
pulling obscure, as Bill noted, obscure comments, passages that are questionable to begin with, and making a mountain out of it and presenting it as
Writing a whole book
this is
out
the
of it.
Mormon view. This is the real Mormonism.
The God
mm,
who weeps, writing a whole book out of it.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Which is less than a mountain, maybe, but still significant.
yeah.
it was very tiny, but because it was hardback, they could charge a lot for it.
Yeah.
Oh, we have ponder questions.
Yeah. We're going to ponderize. So these are just some, I don't know how much time we want to spend looking at some of these, but we've already given some examples. Bill, you just gave some examples about other teachings that we've taught, and then they come in tension with another teaching that we want to introduce. And so, how do we deal with this old teaching? Do we just be silent on it, quietly hoping it will disappear? Do we come out and formally renounce that
Never,
prior teaching?
never.
Never do
Nope, we don't talk about it and we don't emphasize it.
that. Yeah.
And then we do the old switcheroo. And the switcheroo is not like a magician. Hello. Did you see that change? It was amazing. No, the old switcheroo for Mormons takes like 20 to 30 years. As they slowly phase out the teaching that they don't want to have anymore, and as they slowly phase in the new teaching, which may be very, very different from the former teaching, as in this case.
Yeah. RFM, you and I talked earlier about this off air about the corporeality of God.
Oh, yes, yes. It was a strange thing, right? Because you got the articles of faith with actually, I keep saying articles. The lectures on faith are in the Doctrine and Covenants. In fact, they are the doctrine in the Doctrine and Covenants.
Yeah.
But it describes very clearly that God is a body, has a body of spirit. Okay. Not of flesh and bones. Jesus, yes. God, no. Okay. And the issue on that is that the Doctrine and Covenants, the lectures on faith, including lecture 5 and that description of God, was published and contained in the same Doctrine and Covenants that had section 130 in it, saying that what we are all taught, right? That God has a body of flesh and bones as tangible as man's, which is completely contradicted by lecture 5 in the same volume. And they existed in the same volume, I believe, from 1876 to 1921, when the lectures on faith were taken out of the Doctrine and Covenants, leaving only the covenants, but they still called it Doctrine and Covenants. Just hope people would notice. Did it without church vote. But for that period of time, which is around 50 years or so, half a century, Mormons have two completely and contradictory descriptions of the nature of God in the Doctrine and Covenants. And right now, Mormons have two completely contradictory descriptions of the apostasy on the church website. Just look at the church, the missionary. What is it? Come follow me, come obey me, do what I
Preach
say.
my gospel. Preach
My gospel. That's it. Preach my gospel manual
Obey me. It
versus
is the
the
first law
teacher's
of heaven.
seminary manual, right?
is
I
the
mean,
first
my
law of
gosh, it's completely contradictory, but they're right there on the church website.
Yeah.
And maybe if the past is predictor of the future, they're doing the same thing, the same slow roll. And the old teaching about the apostasy will go the way of the dodo,
Yeah.
and in will come the new, and no one will be the wiser.
No. And
Unless
the
you
church
want
will
to.
say, we've always taught this.
Yeah.
Don't you know?
By the way, today's date is May 14th, 2025 for those watching from the future, so we can say, we told you so.
That's right. Could we go to that next slide?
Yes.
For just, I think
Right. This was great.
I thought this was so, wow. You know, he's describing Mormonism.
Yes, but he says it about the Catholics, so we can believe him.
Can I just say before you do that, I just want to note to the audience, folks, the phone lines are open, 662-667-6667, or I'll put the link in and the phone number into the live chat. I've done that a few times already. There is the StreamYard link if you want to come directly into the studio to talk to Professor Harrell and join the Mormonism Live show. We'd love to have you, so please do that. And I just wanted to note that. So back to you, Mr. Harrell.
Okay. So RFM, I don't know. Do you want to read this one?
Bill? I'm sorry, RFM? Me? Yeah, sure.
RFM.
What characterizes actually, Bill, are you available to do this?
I
I've
sure
been talking
can.
an awful
Okay.
lot.
That's all right. What characterizes self-correcting institutions like the Catholic Church is that even when change happens, it is denied rather than celebrated. The first rule of changing church teachings is that you never admit to changing church teaching.
It's like Fight Club.
You would never hear a pope announcing to the world, our experts have just discovered a really big error in the Bible. We'll soon issue an updated edition. Instead, when asked about the church's more generous attitude toward Jews or women, popes imply that this was always what the church really taught, even if some individual churchmen previously failed to understand the message correctly. Yuval Harari, author of Nexus 2024, also the author of Sapiens, is where people may have heard of him.
Yeah.
Totally Mormonism. That's exactly what the Mormons do. And I'm glad that we're not alone. The Catholics do it too. And they're probably not alone either.
Yeah. And they've been doing it for a couple thousand years now.
So they're better at it.
Yeah. They've perfected it.
Yeah. That's
We
because
learn
they're
from
infallible.
this. Yeah. Okay.
Are we ready for the phone calls? So basically, the conclusion tonight
Oh,
is we have got a shadow government in the church that is trying to change doctrine on the apostasy in order to make it more appealing to other Christian churches, or at least not as outright offensive, so that we can go along, get along, hold hands, and sing Kumbaya and bring about the second coming. Or this is something that the leadership of the church is directing these people to do, and they actually know what's going on, and this is part of the plan. One or the other, I think, is happening. Are there any other alternatives that you can think of, Professor?
no, I think you covered the options that come to my mind. I'm sure there are others. Bill would probably think of another one.
I'd have to think for a minute, but there's going to be numerous ones.
I bet Michelle Stone could come up with one.
Contradictions in yeah, that
No,
would be a
conspiracy
problem.
theory.
Won't be a problem. I put a whole list together, and again, I'm sort of inspired by you, Professor Harrell. Let me find it here really quick. This is I'll put it in the live chat, and I'll put it over here on the page too. I've showed this a few times. It's not the most artistic rendition here, but let me take that off. Put that up. Mormon Truth Crisis: Examining the Deception and Obfuscation Within Mormonism. And so it's a comprehensive list of things hidden or obscured in Mormonism in order to manipulate members into belief. And then also, let me go back. Reversals and abandonment of doctrines. So, and then each list is like 100 long, and each one's sourced multiple times. You know, church leaders have taught that the devil had power over the water. They seem to have abandoned that.
Right.
Especially since there's a waterproof Book of Mormon now, right, RFM?
Yeah, and the garments and everything. You got that waterproof Book of Mormon doesn't even make any sense to me. It's like you're tempting the missionaries to go near the water just to test it out.
There's so many contradictions in Mormonism that if anybody would just sit still long enough and let you ask them the questions, they couldn't help but acknowledge that it's just.
I got to tell you the story, okay? So I'm out with my father-in-law and my first wife. I was young, okay? And we're at a restaurant, and I don't really make any money, you know, and I'm a struggling law student and all this stuff. So, of course, I order the chicken, right? And he says, no, you need to order something other than chicken. Well, I really like chicken. Okay, so I ordered the chicken, right? And then there was a question that came up about some kind of family activity. I think it was my mission. And was I telling a story about my mission? My father-in-law was not a member, okay? And neither was his wife. So that was always a source of tension, among other things, with his son-in-law. But the subject of not swimming when I was a missionary somehow came up, and immediately says, well, why was that? And I said, well, it's just because, you know, lots of accidents happen when you're swimming. And he, an attorney, by the way, eyed me narrowly and said, yeah, I think it's something different. But no, I doubled down on my lie and continued to eat the chicken. True story. I mean, this is how Mormonism makes liars of us all, right? Because we know this sounds stupid. Jesus. I mean, you got the destroyer, you know, he's I don't know what he's doing. He's skiing on the waters, and he's dangerous. And so missionaries can't go swimming. I mean, how do you tell that to your non-member father-in-law who already hates you?
Yeah.
So you lie. You learn to lie.
And the waters are cursed. I mean, in the beginning, God blessed the waters, but in the latter days, they're cursed.
Mm-hmm.
So watch out.
Yeah, I understand this because Joseph Smith wanted to ride the coach instead of the canoe. Is that true? I think it is.
Yes.
Back from Missouri or something like that, or to Missouri. I think it was back from.
That's great.
There was a call in the call queue. It came in and then it vanished after like 30 seconds. So sorry about that. But yeah, no calls in the call queue. But I did want to say, I did put the link in the live chat. And by the way, folks, if you want to call 662-667-6667, I really love this conversation. I think this is just one more instance where something doesn't mean what you're being told it means, and you have to be serious enough about Mormonism to go looking for things rather than accept what you're told. But I wanted to put the link in the live chat for This Is My Doctrine and encourage folks to have it. If you're going to have 5 books on your shelf, This Is My Doctrine by Professor Harrell is one of them. And so that's in the live chat. Please grab that book.
Well, Bill, I think the most important thing to come out of tonight's episode is a big I told you so. Because you and I, we were all over this like a year ago and talking about how the church seems to be involved in changing the definition of the apostasy.
Yeah, and it has to. I mean, Charlie's right. It has to. The Maxwell Institute comes out with the Ancient Christian book, Ancient Christians, and they're saying this. They're saying like the apostasy is just not what Mormonism said it was. So we have to do it.
You mean historically?
Yeah. I'm saying,
based on the manuscript evidence.
Yeah, they're going into biblical studies, scholarship, criticism.
They're
looking at the history, right? And what needs to happen is the church just needs to go, we messed up. We said it this way, but it actually is that way. And, shame on us for not getting it right. Maybe we don't see it around corners as well as we tell you we do. But they can't do that. That's not allowed. So what has to be done then is we have to go find something from someone early on in the church that will justify that there were people in the church who got it right. There were just other people who got it wrong. And that's the direction it has to go. But it's the institutional church that decided what the Great Apostasy would mean in the name it whatever, but I'll say 80s and 90s, 2000s. The church decided that. Did they not do that by revelation? And if they were unable to define the Great Apostasy by revelation, then maybe revelation doesn't work that great.
Yes, they're about redefining with the apostasy, they're redefining the restoration out of existence.
Yeah. Yep.
They're playing with fire. One could say they're juggling hand grenades, Bill.
Or walking on landmines. There's only certain people who are qualified enough to help us get around the landmines and to help get rid of the hand grenades that are coming out. And John Gee is certainly one of them.
He is self-proclaimed. We know it's true because he told us so.
Yeah. I often feel embarrassed, Professor Harrell, when nobody calls in because I think we all feel like it means something, but I'm just telling you, what you put together here is rock star kind of stuff, and your work stands on its own. So sorry that we don't have a call because I really do like that part of the show. But
well, it is a pretty much open and closed case. I mean, there's not a lot of debate about what's going on here.
Well, would someone call in just so we can know the phone lines are working?
Well, here's Kendall. Kendall's here.
A lot of debate about.
Hello. You mind muting your sound there on our stuff? Thank you, Kendall.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. That's what happens.
Yeah, sorry. I don't have anything particular to say, just when you made the comment about calling in, because I loved this presentation. Stuff like this is really good for my mental health because my whole life I was just totally gaslit and told like, hey, there's no there. There's no problems. I was never taught that. Like, what is your problem? And so just stuff like this is just so important to the cause and to the work. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Kendall. I think it's great too. And I'll tell you, the secret works of darkness of these scholars, these Mormon scholars trying to pull a fast one, are being exposed to the world on Mormonism Live.
I'll just note, because I asked you if you had reached out to Terrell Givens to notify him of this research. So I just emailed Professor Givens and notified. I copied about 4 of the slides and dropped them in an email to him and just said, hey, is it possible that we're misunderstanding the way that you and others use this quote? And we'll see if he responds. But normally Terrell and those folks at this point tend to just ignore me. So we'll see.
Well, maybe you'll come on the show.
I did find something relevant to share. This is from 1984. You ready?
The book.
Yeah. So I reread it after my faith crisis, and there's like 10 quotes I've marked with 5 stars because they're just so relevant, but just particular to today, when they're talking about going back and changing history, like we were never at war with this nation, we were actually always at war with this nation, and people accept it because that's all that they have access to. And just with regards to this issue, with regards to rocking the hat, like look at how prescient this was. He says, quote, "The past was erased, the erasure was forgotten, and then what was a lie became the new truth."
That's like the description of the Gospel Topics essays.
Yeah.
Maybe
Very
the
good.
concluding thing is, if they're not going to admit they're wrong, they've been right all along. That's the stance they hold. They've been right all along. We just maybe had a little bit of misunderstanding by certain leaders, but we got it right. We have John Taylor. We got it right. It's on some level they've got to do something with the Great Apostasy, and we'll see, because I think this is one of those moments where we're right in the middle of them redefining this topic, and you've taken away this loophole, so they'll have to find something, and so it'll be interesting to see what else they come up with.
That's great.
Yep. But anyway,
All right.
thank you for your work, and the people who record history are the ones who will be remembered. So thank you for recording this and making it known what really happened.
All right. Thank you, Kendall.
I should say too, that was excellent, Kendall. The other thing that Harari says in his book in Nexus, he contrasts what the Catholics do and any institution that is led by, an autocracy or oligarchy, that they tend to operate that way. They have this, you have to trust us. We cannot err. We cannot do wrong. He contrasts that with democratic institutions, that they also have a self-correcting mechanism, but it works much quicker, faster, much more effective, because they acknowledge we were wrong, we made a mistake, course correction here, everybody feels good, we know where we were, we know where we are now, I feel great. And so science, that's how science works, right? You have the peer review. Nobody's afraid of, people are still afraid, but too bad. That's how the system works. You got peer review. You got to be able to measure up to the standards. If you don't, then your ideas don't hold a thing.
Yeah, we do have 3 calls in the queue now, so I'm going to go to, not sure what that was, but I'll go to one of these here.
Did you hear that?
I did hear that.
It's like a scene from Thunderbolt.
Victor, how are you doing?
I'm doing very good, sir. How are you?
Yeah, glad to have you on. You're with Professor Harrell and RFM and myself. What's on your mind?
Yeah, so I'm not a Mormon. I'm an evangelical that was approached by a few Mormon missionaries. However, now I'm fascinated. I've been attending for about 16 months to learn about the faith. I'm wondering, from your point of view, especially with the changing definition of apostasy and the monarchical view by Blake Osler, Travis Anderson, Robert Boylan, and Jacob Hansen, as Latter-day Saints, do you feel like this is what you were taught while you were in the church? And is the presidency aware of what is going on?
Well, I will tell you, Victor, this is definitely different from what I was taught in the church. I don't know about, honestly, I don't know, because the church has become so big with so many companies, so many manuals, so many ventures that a lot of times the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So I don't know, which allows other people who are under leadership and are just staff to do things willy-nilly, so long as it doesn't come to the attention of anybody above them. Now, I think that there may be something to the idea, which I hadn't mentioned before, but which occurs to me now, is that the church is intentionally now having two sets of messages. And one set of messages can be quoted to the outside Protestant world in order to mollify them, while maintaining the inside message of the Great Apostasy in order to show Mormons how special the church is.
Yeah, and
That makes sense.
Yeah, I'll only add, you mentioned Jacob Hansen and some of those guys. The way that they address the gospel is to sort of stay away from dealing with what was said in the past and where the contradiction is. Like RFM, I learned a Mormonism in the 1990s that doesn't resemble at all the Mormonism that's being taught to the younger generation today. But as RFM also pointed out, not only is there two gospels, one to the outside world and one to the membership, there's also multiple gospels on the inside. There's an older generation that's allowed to hold on to the things they were taught. Meanwhile, the youth are given something entirely different. And it's really on every issue. Professor Harrell, who we've had here on the show tonight, his book is essentially pointing out, this is my doctrine, points out that there's not a single doctrine in the entire Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that hasn't been adapted, shifted, abandoned, reversed, or molded into something different in some way. And so when you have prophets, seers, and revelators who claim to be the mouthpieces of God, and there's a restoration necessary, and Joseph Smith is that prophet, and then Brigham Young and everyone who followed, and then you disavow and abandon and change every doctrine, you call into question God's ability to communicate with those prophets. If everything is different than it was originally given, if Joseph Smith was told that the temple ordinances can't be altered and then the brethren alter them, if the garment can't be altered but it's altered, if the sacrament prayer changes from the Book of Mormon to the D&C, if celestial polygamy marriage was essential for salvation and then it wasn't, maybe the church is just shifting with the world and is trying to avoid looking ridiculous. Maybe it doesn't really have the truth that it claims to.
Yeah. One last question. Do you feel like there's a bigger reliance on philosophers like Blake Osler rather than the brethren at the moment?
Who relies on Blake Osler? Because I think Blake Osler is 99.9999% of Latter-day Saints either don't know who Blake Osler is or couldn't reference anything he's ever said.
Yeah, because on the streets, every time we're talking to the young missionaries, especially, or on YouTube, everybody's talking about the monarchical view of God, and nobody's trying to align with the infinite regress of God. His name comes up all the time. So from our point of view, it's like everybody's taking this road and nobody's holding the prophets as authoritative. Like, Brigham Young, oh, no, he was just a fallible man. But we are all holding to this view at the moment.
Yes, well, prophets are only prophets when they're speaking as prophets, not when they're speaking as men. And if they say anything that proves a later embarrassment to the church, you'll know which way they were speaking.
That's circular reasoning.
Okay.
Thank you for calling, Victor.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks for watching the show.
Take it easy.
Have a good day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did he say he was a member of the church?
I thought he was an evangelical.
Okay, evangelical. But he was.
Then I thought he said something about a member for a certain period of time, and I wasn't positive either way. Charlie, help us out. Oh, I've been
Oh, you're
longing to
muted,
say
you're
this
muted,
for
Charlie.
Professor my whole life.
Fun to say that.
I think you're muted, Charlie. Bill did that.
I didn't.
No, that was me. Yeah, it sounded to me like he was investigating the church, but I may be wrong.
Yeah,
It was difficult to understand what he was
that
saying.
might be short-lived.
You shouldn't be
All right.
watching this show. Look, if any of you out there are investigating the LDS Church, the last show you should be watching is this show, okay?
Yeah.
Because you're going to find out all the
Hold
stuff
off
the missionaries are not telling you.
Yeah.
And in fact, you're going to be telling, we're going to find out all the stuff the missionaries don't even know because the church has been hiding it from them so they can hide it from you.
Yeah. There
And
you go.
that thing is it's not a joke.
Is this Tim Rathbone?
Tim,
Yes.
Tim, how are you?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Excellent.
Hi, Tim.
Hi. Does Gibbons give the reference to the Journal of Discourses with his quote?
Oh, yes.
So he changes the quote and he gives the reference.
yes.
He doesn't change the quote though, does
Yeah,
he?
he doesn't change it.
He doesn't change it.
Yeah. You said he added individuals, men to individuals, or
He took out men and in brackets put individuals, people or individuals to make it gender neutral.
Right. But the thing is that when it's talking about men in those ages, it really is talking about men in those ages, the
Yes.
prophets and the apostles in the New
That's
Testament
important.
and in the Old Testament.
Yeah, that's important to the context.
Yeah. So in the name of being
yes.
more it's the inclusive, right? With the language, he actually sacrifices the meaning of the expression.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was. In other
Yeah,
words, John
change it
Taylor wasn't
all
using men
context.
necessarily as a synonym for everybody.
To his benefit, though, that quote isolated all by itself with no context could be taken to mean the way he's using it. The issue comes in that there is sufficient material to completely correct that, and multiple people have repeated this and nobody's thought to go looking. By the way, Charlie, this is the thing that happens when you're a believing Mormon and you find an evidence for the view you want to have. No one goes looking any further. It's good enough.
Yeah.
You got to do the reading.
And I just want to emphasize, you don't have to go any further than the talk itself to understand that that's not what it's saying. Professor Harrell did a lot of research that really made that absolutely clear. But I read this yesterday morning, and it was clear to me that's not what it was talking about. And your first clue should be, why is John Taylor saying something that no church leader ever said in the history of the church before or since?
Yeah.
And no one even remarked about it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
For 130 years, nobody took notice of it.
And the answer is obvious, because he didn't.
Yeah.
Anything else, Tim? Otherwise, I'll thank you. And
No,
Let you go.
I just wondered if he actually gave the citation, where to find it,
Oh, yeah.
or if he was hiding something. That's okay.
Well, he's not hiding it, but he's leaving all these subsequent scholars without excuse.
well, he's either hiding something or he's ignorant,
Okay.
and it's only one or the other.
No,
Thank you, Tim.
Well,
what's
we
the
know
name
he's
of the
not
professor
ignorant.
again? Herr Studebaker. What was his name?
Dursteller.
Dursteller. Herr Dursteller. He may be many things, but he is not stupid.
Durka, right? Is that what you would normally say?
Herr Studebaker.
All right. Have a great night, Tim.
Sure, no.
Take it easy. And then we've got one more call, and I'm sorry, but right when we did all that, then all of a sudden 3 calls came in. So this will be the last call for the night.
Oh,
Truth, are you wanting to talk? It says you're wanting to talk about garments. I'd really like to keep this on the topic at hand.
you could call in Friday and talk about garments all you like.
The changes in garments is part of the doctrine changes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
In reference to Charley Harrell's conclusion, which is there's been lots of things that have changed.
Exactly.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm thinking about so just the psychology. So when I was giving Temple Recommend interviews and read that passage on the garment hundreds of times, I never had an issue with the way the garments were at the time. But back when they changed it at the turn of the century, when it was all the way to the ankles, all the way to the wrists, I didn't give much thought to that. But now that they've changed it again, and in more modern times, a significant change, something that I would have advised against, because we talked about not adjusting it, not changing it, not doing anything. And now there's been changes, and all of a sudden it's okay. So sort of the psychological shift that members are kind of presented or kind of have to do to somehow reconcile that in their mind, even though it's a significant change in some cases from what they've known all their lives. I'm wondering what's driving that. But it happens. It certainly happens, where you have to sort of bend your mind and make excuses to somehow make it okay and make sense.
Yeah, and I like this example because the garment changes are changes that just within my lifetime and not that long ago were criticized by leaders of the church, for women especially, modifying or monkeying with their garment to make it match the latest styles and show more shoulder than should be allowed. And now they change it. And they wait long enough, they hope nobody will notice and think really it is revelation and not just they're caving again. But what do you think, Professor Harrell, happens in a person's mind in order to make sense of the changes in the garment pattern while still maintaining faith in Mormonism?
Good question. In the case of the garment, if people aren't aware of the history behind it and how in the past there was so much emphasis on, don't modify the garment. It has to be the way that it is. If they're not aware of that, then they just go along with the fact that, hey, the church is changing, or the church has come out with this new policy with the garment, and the church is led by a prophet, so I'm on board with it. But there is always, whenever this happens, this kind of change happens, there's always a fraction, sometimes a greater or lesser fraction of saints who will say, no, I remember the teaching. I am not going to give in to this modernist kind of pressure. They recognize it as more of a modern pressure. This is what happened with polygamy, right? I mean, there was the fraction of saints, a faction that continued practicing it. Some of them broke off from the church. And this happens today. We have people breaking off from the church, essentially, because they are saying the church is going astray now with this new kind of policy or teaching.
Yes.
So it is interesting.
One of them's called the One Piece faction. It
And
started back around the
people that are trying
1970s.
to remain true to what they were taught are labeled as apostates. Instead of it being the church, it's actually deviating from what the standard was.
It is. It's the church.
And interestingly enough,
it's the church moving the goalpost, and you have to constantly stay with the moving goalpost, or you're the one who's in apostasy. Anybody who stays still is the apostate. If you move with the church, changing everything, then you're on the one true path.
Yes.
Right. And that's the psychological thing that I'm thinking about. Even the way that it was presented, they can't call them sleeveless garments, which they are. They call them open sleeve garments.
Oh, they still have a sleeve. It's just open. It's just not there.
Invisible.
Right. Exactly. It's not there, but you can't say sleeveless. You have to say open sleeve. How odd is that? And how mind-bending, twisting to try to make sense of it, even in the way it's presented.
Yeah.
Hey, Truth, it was good seeing you this past weekend. How warm was it in there?
Well, after we got the air conditioning taken care of, it was much better.
Before that.
It was pretty warm. Yeah, it was pretty warm. Yeah.
It was like we had 36 or 7 people in a closed room with no ventilation, with the heat stuck on 76 in St. George. There's nothing good about any of
But it
that.
was a great time. It was a great time. It was well worth it, and it was a wonderful evening.
It was
Thank
like-
you both so much for that.
It was like an
Thank you so much.
1896 endowment session in the St. George Temple. It was.
Thank you so much, Truth. I appreciate it.
Have a great night, my friend.
Absolutely. You too. Take care. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for calling.
Well, thank you too, Professor Harrell. It's been wonderful having you on the show to go over this recent research, which I think is very important, calling out what's going on so everybody can know what these people are up to and that we're on to their game. Bill Reel, thank you as always for being here, running things in the background and contributing wonderful insights throughout. And everybody out there, thanks so much for watching Mormonism Live. Please join us Friday evening at 8:00 p.m. Mountain Time for Mormonism After Dark, where we put on tuxes or evening wear, formal or semi-formal. Both are accepted. I go for the formal. Maybe have something to drink, and we just relax. We talk about things Mormon, the past week, things of interest, maybe little tidbits that people wouldn't otherwise know going on behind the scenes, or little bits here or there that by themselves would not normally constitute a full podcast. And there's lots of those things too. We have a great time, and I hope you'll join us. Then next Monday for the newscast at 6:00 p.m. Mountain Time. And once again, coming full circle to next Wednesday, 6:20 p.m. And we'll see about changing that time, but we're not doing it yet. 6:20 p.m. Mountain Time for the next the next episode of Mormonism Live. Good night, everybody.
Good night.